Awesome. Well, welcome everyone. We are transmitting live in our 69th I Need Living conversation. This magical 69 number that everybody knows what it what it means. Coincides with something very sexual, which is the process of the ontogenic basis of you, which is how you are formed, how you're developed as an embryo. And I'm with Blue Heron Woman. I'm Julian Katari, and Blue Heron Woman is going to give us a lecture, a teaching. She's going to share from her heart and her spirit these very wise words about how we evolve and how that's related to the way we understand the life we live in. And you're going to see that it should change, should shift your perception of the universe as you understand how you've been not raised, but how you've developed as you were a fetus or an embryo, right?
Right.
Am I going the right way?
Yes, you are.
Cool. So welcome everyone, and here we are.
So this is a huge subject. We're just barely scratching the surface tonight. So this will probably take another 2 to 3 weeks to complete.
Okay.
So the ontogenic basis of you. Body systems don't exist in reality because our bodies function as a whole, and it is only as a whole that we should seek to understand it.
Okay.
So how do our bodies function naturally and correctly, naturally? So again, like I talked about last week in reply to Little Red Riding Hood's question to the wolf of why do you have eyes so big and ears so big? The wolf's correct response would have been, I have eyes and ears so big because they developed in me.
Yeah.
They didn't develop for the purpose of us seeing, they just developed. So the ability to see is not the result of a design coming to fruition. It's simply a consequence of embryonic development of an egg.
Right. Which is to say, I mean,
right?
I don't know if I'm right if I say this, but let's yeah. What I'm understanding from this is there is no design when you're being created, right? I mean, the design's already there.
There's no, I think it's a humbling statement because we believe these things were made specifically for our enjoyment, but they weren't. They're just a developmental expression. So right, I think it helps take us down a notch because we're all living above the power of heaven right now in this domination society. We've told heaven, fuck you, we can do better than you. So we're all living, most of us, above heaven. And this statement is really key, I think, impactful about bringing us back down below the power of heaven to understand that, no, heaven didn't fucking make our embryo to have eyes so we could see. It's just the process of development.
Right. It's there whether what you believe in, whether you're going to use it, whether.
Yeah.
Okay.
So today we know that the later adult human functions of organs and our whole body, our performances are initiated through growth functions. Growth functions are early activities that occur in our embryo at the time that everything, including the organs, are forming. So it is only on the basis of these growth functions that the organs are trained to be what they're meant to be. And I use quotation marks about that, it's using that lightly. Yeah. So growth functions precede all higher functions. So the achievements of the embryo are always the precursors of all subsequent accomplishments. The growth functions constitute the natural plan for all adult functions. So if the embryo didn't have these growth functions, we would not exist.
Mm-hmm.
There is no cell.
Would it be a way of saying that you haven't accomplished anything in a way, kind of?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely it is, because we all take credit for stuff, and the only reason we are being is because we were a fertilized egg at one time.
Yeah.
And we're going to make another impactful statement here in a bit about that. Okay. So there is no cell, no tissue, and no organ that does not already function during its very development. So it's functioning while it's developing. It's working while it's developing.
Okay.
We human beings develop from a uniquely human cell. We don't develop from a monkey cell. We don't develop from a banana cell. We develop from a human cell.
Yeah, that's important to clear out.
There is, yeah, even though we share 66% of our DNA with a banana and a higher percentage than that with a monkey, we are still developed from a human cell.
Right.
So there is no stage in human embryo development prior to which one could claim that a being exists with not yet human individuality.
A being? A bee? What?
There is no stage in the embryonic development prior to which one could claim that a being exists with not yet human individuality, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a fertilized human egg, a conceptus, is which we'll be referring to from now on, is already a human being.
Okay, yeah.
So, and as a whole, every organism, which is what our bodies are, is a living organism, has an incomparable individuality, which means we all have the same form, but our individuality is incomparable to anyone else.
Right, we have a unique structure. We know about the fingerprints, we know about the retina, but that's probably everywhere where it's unrepeatable. We're unique. Mm-hmm.
Yes, each one of us is unique. So without exception, a specific egg that is undisturbed during its subsequent development always gives rise to a specific organism. Always. So a human conceptus is always going to give rise to a human, unless it's disturbed during its development, which would be abortion. Okay. That's the only disturbance that I can imagine that would bring forth a human. You could say, well, drinking alcohol brings forth fetal alcohol syndrome. Well, it's still a human being. Yeah. This is what we have to understand. We can't continue to separate. That which changes during development is only the phenotype and not the essence. So phenotype means the observable characteristics of our organism, and that's our individuality, right? So like our red hair, our brown eyes, So without exception, each organ that is developing in the embryo is contributing to the shape of the whole body. So an organism with the name of Konrad Lorenz, who lived from 1903 to 1989, tried to postulate a psychogenetic principle whereby human behavior was supposed to be interpretable as a recapitulation of animal behavior. As a result, the misunderstanding has arisen, and it's not a misunderstanding, it's a deliberate misunderstanding of control. The misunderstanding arose that human behavior could be accounted for directly by the behaviors of our presumed animal ancestors. So why is it a mechanism? Why is this belief a mechanism of control? Because this belief has led to the interpretation that humans, the human being is nothing other than a more highly developed animal, so that we could be manipulated arbitrarily and trained.
Mhm. Okay.
Right. So that's where that has come from, starting in 1903.
Yeah, that's an observation. But
Right, but that's been, it's not just an observation, Julian. That pervades every single bit of our programming, that we can be trained because we're no higher than an animal. And
I was
I
thinking,
use that word.
thinking that animals can't be trained, really. I mean, they can, but yet not as well as us. I mean, I wouldn't compare the trainability of an animal to that of a human. I mean, the human can totally be, they can be trained away from their nature so much.
Right. Well, and this is, we could have another whole hour conversation just about this subject, but what I'm trying to get at is our understanding that we've been treated like cattle, like animals,
Okay.
since 1903, since he postulated this.
Okay.
Well, he didn't postulate it in 1903 because he was born in 1903, but right. Early in the 1900s, that Conrad Lorenz, who postulated that our human behavior is interpretable as a recapitulation of animal behavior.
Okay.
And so therefore, we are animals that mean to be trained. This is what the global elite think of us, right? This is where everything has come from. This is what we need to understand.
If I may say that, I mean, like what I'm seeing and all, like it's a phenomenon where any fragmented piece of information about biology mainly, but maybe even about physics or anything, and science is totally fitted into some type of narrative. And
this narrative right here that we can be trained. Exactly, Julian.
Right, because by itself, it's kind of true. When you know it's true, then obviously you would need to fit it into a context, into a holistic understanding of everything else. But that's not being done. We're given these pieces of information, and behind that, in the dark, is the narrative, right?
Is the desire to control, and it even comes through the churches, right? Yeah. In the form that I am broken without God. I am broken, right? And that's not true. That is just simply not true. But they've twisted the narrative. This is the motive behind the narrative, to keep you trainable like an animal. So your pastor can train you so that when he says you're unequally yoked, you need to walk away from the woman you love, you will do so.
Mm-hmm. So that you will
without
obey.
A question. So that you will obey, because he's freaking jealous that you're happy. That's all it is. Mm-hmm. Or your priest or whoever, right?
Or your influencer, your intellectual priest.
Yeah. Yeah. Whoever we look up to as our outside savior, as our path to God, right? So certainly there are comparable behavior patterns in different animals. However, all behaviors, be they animal or human, are always only partial processes of an individually specific whole. And this whole is the only entity with which the behaviors are directly connected. So what that is saying is that while there's behavior patterns that are similar, they can only be connected to each individual specific whole. So therefore, we're not animals, right? We're not. So So now, before we go further, let's make a distinction between embryology or ontogeny and evolution. So in purely linguistic terms, evolution means development. Purely linguistic, it means development. However, we have manipulated and used the word evolution to think of the history of our Earth and of her living forms. So evolution is always now interpreted as a progression from a lesser to a higher form.
Yeah, which is wrong, right?
Which is incorrect and inaccurate. Right? So individual development or ontogeny is the development which, despite external changes, remains unchanged in essence. It is only when a living individual remains the same individual during the entire duration of its existence that we can speak of genuine development. So we remain a human during our entire existence. So we are developing, not evolving to a higher form.
Right. Yeah, so yeah, what would be higher? I mean, how would you?
Yeah, right. So investigations of human ontogeny have shown us conclusively that the notion of evolution is totally unnecessary for understanding of the individual development and anatomy of an individual. So the notion of evolution is out the window. Poof, we just sent it out the window.
Right.
So now there's two more words that we use with development that are propagation and differentiation. So if we compare propagation and differentiation, we can observe that propagation, without which, if we don't have propagation, the constant recurrence of development would not be possible. So propagation is a process that begins on the inside of the cell in the nucleus and is directed to the outside. Differentiations begin on the outside of the cell and set to work here first before gradually penetrating toward the nucleus. And this is exactly the way the universe works. It is always rushing in as it rushes out to expansion.
Okay.
Right, Einstein discovered that. So this outside-inside differentiation of principle applies to the whole living body as well as to every individual cell. There are no hard facts to support the concept from evolution that development and ontogeny is from us inferior to a superior state. There is nothing to support that. So that means the fertilized ovum, the conceptus, is not an inferior. Neither is the toddler, neither is the baby, neither is the child. They are all the same being. So an ovum has an extremely high capacity or potential for original creative development. So the mature organisms that you and I are, although fully developed, are not a higher entity than the egg from which we grew. That's just plain simple, God honest truth, universal truth, that we are not a higher organism than the egg from which we grew.
Okay, yeah. Nor we would be a higher organism from a monkey.
No, exactly. Because the monkey egg, the monkey conceptus, fertilized conceptus, will always produce a monkey. It will never produce a human being. Just like an acorn will always produce an oak, it will never produce a pine tree. And so a pine tree is not higher level than an oak, and neither is an oak a higher level of organism than a pine tree. They're all just trees. They're all standing people.
So instead of evolution, we should talk about differentiation.
Development. Ontogeny.
Okay.
So our human bodies or organisms, for all their complexity and regularity, cannot be described in detail using concepts from evolution and can only be understood as a consequence of our ontogenic development. So what does ontogeny mean? It means that the origin and development of an organism from embryo to adult. So every living organism is ontogenic. That's why I just said it. An acorn ontogenically produces an oak tree. A pine cone ontogenically produces the seeds from a pine cone ontogenically produces a pine tree. Neither is a higher form than the other. They're just differentiated. So DNA is a giant molecule that is conceived of as a thread, which can be split lengthwise and then can be duplicated by adding complementary bases to the split halves. So it's become customary in science to describe DNA as having a genetic code whereby the arrangement of the bases is of direct significance for the construction of cellular proteins. However, there's still a lot of unsolved difficulties in this belief.
Right. That's one of the things I've been intuiting, like strongly, that I'm wanting to learn really, but it's all shady. Anywhere I look, the information regarding DNA and how it's obtained and how it's read and how it's explained, I really don't understand it. I mean,
I don't think anybody truly does, Julian. So it's been accepted that the genetic substance itself and that it is not the genetic substance itself, but rather the manner in which the genetic substance is decoded or read out that determines the role of genes in differentiation. And the readout processes depend on the regulator substances that either free or block the reading of the code. The readout always takes place only with the participation of the extra genetic material that is already present in both the nucleus and the cytoplasm, which is the part that's outside of the cell. So DNA doesn't act on its own. So DNA might be regarded as a cookbook that our bodies require for its metabolism, yet it's totally unclear who the cook is in the kitchen.
okay.
Now, we're going to dip here into the taboo subject of COVID-19 and all these born-again Christian doctors who are proclaiming that, oh my God, they're forever altering your genes because they're focusing exclusively on DNA. That is absolutely false. This is why global elite have not, and they will not ever succeed in their plan, because they're focusing on DNA.
Right. They don't even understand the thing correctly. So, but then may I say that the power there lies in, and I mean, I would say they can alter your DNA in the sense that they can alter your mind thinking that your DNA is being altered, and then you're going to act and you're going to react and you're going to even grow whatever they want you to grow because
exactly. Yeah.
Your mind is being programmed to think that.
Exactly. You're exactly correct in that. You're exactly spot on with that. Exactly. That's the only way your DNA will be altered. And it's only temporary, because as soon as you change your beliefs, it will reform.
Yeah.
So it is particularly unclear how our body can decide from the wealth of available recipes which are the correct genes to use. All the knowledge in the universe, and I'm not talking about wisdom, knowledge means book knowledge, cannot solve the question of how cells differentiate. So in any organism, almost all cells are equipped with identical genes. This is why we share genes with monkeys and bananas and fruit flies and toads and frogs and fish and every living thing, every living organism on this planet. And yet these genes have to know by themselves on the basis of their acquired information how, where, and what differentiation should occur in each split second in every part of the organism during the whole course of the organism's life. So we're giving a lot of power to DNA that it doesn't have. There is no doubt that genes, DNA, are of great importance for hereditary and that they do play a role in differentiation. However, even in the young germ or conceptus, neither the chromosomes nor the genes are dynamically active. Let me repeat that. DNA and chromosomes, genes are not dynamically active.
Dynamically active, what's that? What does that mean?
Dynamic is energy. That's the energetically active. They are, but they aren't. I mean, it's DNA is a receiver and transmitter, but they're not dynamically active in the growth functions. That's what it is. They're not, because the flow, like I described last week, the tessellation, the core, that's dynamically active because that stretches and it conforms and it stretches and it can, right? It's dynamically active. It's always stretching and reforming and stretching and reforming. That's dynamically active. We think that the couch you're sitting on is inert. It's not, it's dynamically active.
As well.
Okay. It's just very slowly dynamically active. That's why it's created a form.
Okay.
Genes are not the motors of development and therefore do not themselves evoke the characteristics of a differentiated organism. What do I mean by differentiated? Well, you have an arm, you have a couple of arms, don't you? You have a couple of ears, you have a couple of eyes, you have a nose, you have lips, you have teeth. That's all differentiation. So genes are not the motors of that, and they don't evoke those characteristics.
Okay. That's a strong statement.
Yeah.
Everybody would think it's in there.
Right. Genes do not work even indirectly via the enzymes that they help to make. However, even the most important enzymes are only aids to the process of differentiation. They're only aids, they're not. And we focus so much on the cell, we focus on the DNA and the enzymes and the right? The cell is much more than the genes.
Yeah.
The cell only functions effectively as a whole, and it is only in the framework of this whole that the genes have any meaning. So this is again why the global elite's plan to permanently alter DNA will never work, because they're isolating only the gene and they're not even looking at the whole. Only the DNA.
So what about the genetically altered food?
I don't think it's genetically altered. I think it's only chemically altered.
Really?
You know, I'm not, I know I'll be directed to more, but now that I've read this, and when I read this book, I read that and it was impactful, but it wasn't until I prepared for this talk tonight that it really sunk in. So now I'm wide open for questions, for answers with this from the universe.
Yeah, no.
From
I mean, may I say? I mean, it's kind of evident that we have a lot to learn, but then anyone that would act and speak in a way that would convince anyone that they know what they're talking about, they only do that through the use of very technical words and because they know technically details, they know, like the name of the notes, right?
Yeah,
Yet they can't really describe the music. I mean,
no,
and so
which is the
they
whole.
can't, we can't, but I think we're onto them. We're onto discovering, hey, we're figuring that you guys are making us believe that you know how it works and that your story is what it is. And no, it's not what it is. You're making
Well,
something
and
up,
then,
and you're
yeah,
projecting
well, and then,
your belief into
exactly.
that story you're making, and obviously
And we all,
they find some type of um corroboration of their beliefs in the blocks, the building blocks they're studying. But
yeah,
I don't think I haven't found anyone that is able to really, without the use of their technical mumbo jumbo, explain to me how it all works.
yeah, no, because they're only looking at fragmented pieces. And we have to remember too, that they only know how only 2% of our DNA works. The rest of it they call junk. So therefore, there really is no knowledge. We have to understand this. While they map the human genome and they think they accomplished, they didn't map shit.
Right. I agree with that. I would start questioning even the methods and how they map out the gene. I mean, this is we're talking about something that is infinitesimally small. We can't see it through a microscope. How the hell do you get that to, okay, there's chemical methods where you can kind of see what proteins are forming, but we're talking about something that is millions of proteins long. I mean, I can think of so many things that could go wrong when you're chemically trying to map that out.
Yeah. But not only that, Julian, what we have to understand, and this is what I told my oldest sister a few months ago. She messaged me and asked me for recommendations for high cholesterol. And I told her, what you have to understand is the blood that they took from you and put in a tube and spun and tore apart and stuck under the microscope is no longer you. So if you go to treat, if you believe that you have high cholesterol and treat yourself for high cholesterol, you're treating that blood in the tube. You're not and imposing that blood in the tube on your human body.
And that makes sense because, I mean, let's say you're a composite of blocks that is structured in a specific way. When you break those blocks up, you're gonna get, some type of reading of what blocks those are. But like you're saying, it's not you because they've been broken up.
Yeah, because they've destroyed the whole. They've taken, right? So this could be a whole big, huge subject, but there's no direct connection between the genes in the nucleus and the form of the whole cell. Let me repeat that. There is no direct connection between the genes in the nucleus and the form of the whole. No direct connection. Okay. This is why they are failing, have failed, and only have produced disease because they're toxifying their bodies with their goddamn vaccines. Every single vaccine, every single pill, every single medicine you take is only producing disease because they think they know it all. And the fact is there is no direct connection between the genes and the nucleus and the whole.
Right. I mean,
so what's that saying is if you're treating a part, you're not treating the whole and you're fragmenting. Mm-hmm. You're causing destruction. So just as it is unlikely that a sandbank by itself can cause ripples at low tide on the basis of its chemical nature alone, rather it requires the strength of the wind and the surge of the waves, two media, right? It requires the wind and the waves to create ripples. It doesn't do that by itself.
The sand?
Yeah, if you look at a sandbank, how do sand dunes form? Do they just form? No, They require wind and they require
Like, yeah,
rain
land dunes,
or movement. Yeah. Or the ripples of sand on a beach. Do they do that by themselves? No.
right. They require the
That would
whole.
be like, yes. Well, there's two external media, right? That cause this. So, so it is highly equally unlikely that the formative materials, rather than the formative forces, are the direct motors of phenogenesis. Let me the formative materials, which would be in this case the sand, right? Formative materials can't do it by itself. It has to have the formative forces of the wind and the water to make
That's
it to direct.
Thing that everybody's ignoring when they think about DNA. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we understand where you're getting at.
So in any phase of development, changes in form and structure must result from the complex movement of particles of a molecular and submolecular nature. At all times, such movements, which are the manifestations of physical forces, are the direct causes for changes in position, form, and structure that lead to differentiation. So what did I just say? Movements and physical forces and etheric, which I mean behind the etheric is the energetic forces, are the direct causes for change. It's not DNA.
There we go. Which then we're not going to be told about, because it would mean they can't control us through our ignorance.
Right. Right. So the form of the organism or body differentiates directly under biodynamic forces, not chemical genetic information.
Yeah. Yeah, it just makes total sense.
So then what is the contribution of genes? That then, well, we might as well just take them out. We can get rid of them if they're inert and don't do shit, right?
No.
Well, genetic material attains its significance in the context of the individually specific living metabolism already occurring in the ovum. The genes do not contain a pattern for subsequent differentiations. Let me repeat that. This is in direct opposition to Bruce Lipton. The genes do not contain a pattern for subsequent differentiations. They are the chemical constants of metabolism. So as such.
Does some of this information come from Maturana?
No, this is all from a guy named Blachschmidt, a German guy, German dude.
Okay. Wow.
Eric Blachschmidt. So genes, DNA, are the chemical constants of metabolism. And so they're the stable components in a cell. They're the ones that give us our matrix of being, our crystalline matrix. That's what they do. So as the genes are specific, especially stable structures, they are much too inert to act by themselves. Let me repeat that. Genes, DNA, is a stable structure that's much too inert to act by itself. Rather, it responds, or genes, respond to the stimuli coming from the cytoplasm, from outside the cell. They do not act so much as they respond.
Okay, yeah.
It is certain that the genetic material serves to preserve the individuality of the organism, and the extra genetic material, the cytoplasm, elicits the changes in appearance that are observed during development. So that's the only thing we know, is that the genetic material preserves our individuality, but it's the extracellular matrix. It's the cytoplasm that elicits the changes. That's the environment. That's the terrain theory of Anton Béchamp, as opposed to Louis Pasteur.
Okay.
That's how the beliefs can alter
The
your
wind
DNA.
and the wind
Yeah, that's the wind
and the sand
and the
ripples.
water that make the sand ripples. Exactly. So we know that the effect of a force depends on what exists at the point of its application. In every case, what actually arises from the action of pressure depends on the circumstances at the point of the application. So now we're getting more and more deep into this. So the effect of a force depends on what exists, where it's focused, right? And what actually arises depends on the circumstances.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the environment.
So the information in the cell nucleus represents the preservation of individuality with the help of an individually specific metabolism.
Okay.
Genetic information denotes the capacity to be human.
Mm-hmm.
Or the capacity to be a monkey, or the capacity to be a fruit fly, or the capacity to be a banana.
Mm-hmm.
So how does it happen that we are shaped ontogenetically in the form in which we know ourselves and not some other form? Well, we've got to grasp the relationship, the INI, the mutual reciprocity. Relationship is INI, right? Mutual reciprocity. We must grasp the INI between the form and the forming of the body.
Mm-hmm.
Just as I said when we talked about aloha, INI Dao living aloha principles, it's love is always a being and becoming. It's INI is a form and a forming.
Mm-hmm.
But same difference. To understand the form in which we know ourselves, we must describe our form as a process of formation and follow the spatial changes over time. These spatial changes are developmental movement, vibration, rhythm. Right there, we tie in the natural governance laws of the universe, developmental movement. Right. So the living organism is always a whole, always, always, always. No matter how many different ways we view it or assess it, it's always a whole. To account for the developmental process in its entirety requires more than just a physical or chemical description. So for each differentiating organ, we are able to discriminate between the development of its position, which is topogenesis, and the development of its form, which is morphogenesis, and the development of its internal structure, which is tectogenesis. So this goes hand in hand with Don Oscar Miro Quesada talks about three forces of energy, Kausai, Sami, and Kanchai, that you use in healing in his lineage. The Taoists talk about three treasures, right? So we have topogenesis, which is position.
Mm-hmm.
Form is morphogenesis, and internal structure is tectogenesis. So again, we have three. This is how these all tessellate together.
Mm-hmm.
Changes in position are directly linked to changes in form, and these in turn lead to changes in internal structure. Development of position, form, and structure emerge collectively as forming movements or forming functions. Movements of molecular and submolecular materials otherwise invisible express themselves as forming movements. Remember what we talked about with the coup, the subconscious? It's muscular memory stored in the muscle, right? forming, movement, 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 movement. Rhythm, vibration, polarity, because you need the positive and the negative to flow for movement, right? Developmental movements are always occurring against resistance, and so they're also overcoming the resistance. So the movements themselves signify early living achievements and therefore represent work performed in a physical sense. The forming achievements or work are characteristics of the growing organism, performances on which depend all subsequent accomplishments of the adult. So the growth, the forming work done by our embryo, our conceptus, our fertilized organism, produces what we are. That's why it's not a higher organism. That's why we are not a higher organism than the fertilized ovum, conceptus. So without all these forming movements, no mature organism could function. We can describe these biological processes as taking place in force fields by using the concept of a metabolic field. A biodynamic metabolic field is a field of force based on a locally ordered metabolism. Biodynamic metabolic fields can be used to describe cells and cell ensembles or whole areas of differentiation, such as the lung, liver, or thyroid gland. So here we get into, you know, the chakras and things like this. It's all, there's more than 7 centers that we all know about, or 8, which we talked about last week, because each organ is a force field. It has its own metabolic field. It has its own chakra. So how does our differentiated organism or human body arise? So as we go through this, we'll find a uniform pattern of cyclical and interdependent movements that are of special significance for the preservation of individuality. And Umberto Maturana and Francisco Varela talk about this in their drift. They talk of it as drift. So Rupert Sheldrake, when he talks about morphogenesis, he's specifically talking about form, not the he's still fragmented because he's only focusing on the morphogenic fields, the creation of form, but we need the structure, which is the tectogenesis and the position.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's where we're gonna end for tonight.
Well, yeah.
Because to get into any more, we've got to start looking at the conceptus, and then we'll get into the force fields, that cause movement.
What's a conceptus? Conceptus.
The conceptus is the fertilized ovum.
Okay. I didn't know that name. I didn't know I had that name.
Well, that's what this guy, and I mentioned it a couple times, but briefly glazed over it. So conceptus is the fertilized ovum, which is the product of conception.
Okay. Nice name.
Right.
Sounds,
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
So
you're onto something.
So that was, yeah.
And this would, I'm guessing this would be related to your changing of the DNA key name.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Because you're onto figuring out how.
It's the force fields. It's the biodynamic metabolic fields.
Yeah, there's just a lot more to it than just the DNA and what we can see. And I would think if we have trouble mapping out something that is physical in there, imagine trying to map out and explain mechanically the functionality all these force fields. I mean, we do need to understand them there, but to mathematically map them out, I don't know if we'll ever get there.
No, you won't, because it's so far beyond understanding. It's like there's 1,000 names for God, because for the Tao, or whatever you want to call it, because it's an unnameable force. The instant you try to name it, you're fragmenting it.
Right, and that's what takes me to. I mean, on one side we do need to explain all of this and mention it, and understand it, because we gotta get away from this ideas of how they tell us genes work, and how we are limited by this and by that, and we do need to understand that there is an explanation. There is there, and that their explanation is wrong, right?
Well, it's inaccurate and incomplete.
Right, but not just that. I mean, it is manipulated into making us believe something that is not, right?
Right. That is it. That into bringing us to believe inaccurate and incomplete beliefs, because they want to, because of the desire to control. But
Right.
when you focus the spotlight on only one thing, you're fragmenting, and that's
Right.
what we got to understand.
So that's
the
where
body,
we
right?
come
The
back
whole.
to,
How many times did I say the word whole tonight?
right, and that's when we come back to, we have to come back. We will be coming back to some other language, to some other way of describing life and going through life, that is not trying to map out the numbers and the little, having that fragmented mind. And I like to think of how we can just speak in a more spiritual way, right? In a more poetic way, in a more, while it's not technically accurate, speaking through metaphor, speaking through,
It's actually far more effective to speak
exactly
metaphor.
So that takes us back to this mankindness that is more kind of conscious of the whole, is more, it lives as a living being and not as a machine. So it doesn't require these machinic explanations, right? Or these technical mega construction. It can simply say things like, oh, well, you're thinking this and you're going to become what you're thinking, right? It doesn't require all the explanation of how that would play out mechanically. We just know that if you believe something, you're going to become what you believe. That is real, right?
Yeah.
And so many other things that can be explained through a simpler language, which then is, I mean, the system, the society, the elite has well elaborated a thinking pattern in people, where if you use this language that is just kind of more human or more alive or more spiritual, and you don't use the language of the mechanics and the technicalities, then you're just some believer, and you're not
Conspiracy
smart.
theorists.
You're just somebody that has a lot of faith and goes through life without really understanding what's going on. But who really does understand what is going on? I mean, not even. Yeah. So No, this is all so wonderful and so powerful and so necessary. I don't think that there's a little tiny bit I would take out, and it's so we have two more sessions of this topic.
Well, we'll see how it progresses. We're doing the ontogenic basis of you #2 next week. We'll see how far into your embryo we get.
Okay, so let's invite our viewers to that next week, 6 o'clock, same time, through our new YouTube channel. May I say that we've chosen for now YouTube because it's the only place where we can stream to that doesn't charge a whole lot of money.
Yeah.
So that's the reason. I mean, we're totally not friends of the YouTube owners or what they do and what it stands for, but for the time being, hey, let's use them.
Yeah, it's their
means
there for a reason. Yeah,
to get our message through. Be totally subversive against them, so we're not endorsing them in any way. And
yeah,
and thank you, Ingrid, for all these studies and all this information. To me, you're the one I'm looking forward to hearing from and learning from, even more than even like, for example, Rupert Sheldrake, like you said, his vision is limited. I mean, and if you look at the character, and I I know that it's not good to judge the product of somebody by the person that is producing it, but at the same time, it does say something when you look at the person. And this Rupert Sheldrake was totally taken into what I call the ID-19 operation and narrative. He's totally bought into that. It's like, how do you fit that in? How do you make sense of that?
Well, and here's even Bruce Lipton bought into the narrative.
I was, yeah, and this other guy, what's his name? The Baden, this guy that speaks about the miracles, the power of miracles.
Greg Braden.
Greg Braden, there you go.
Yeah.
Bruce Lipton and Greg Braden, they both kind of, as I see it, or as I saw it, because I'm not really following them or anything, but they kind of went, or they kind of want to stand in both grounds somehow,
Yeah.
Or they.
Yeah, well, it's because as I've said, we've all bought this money god, and every spiritual guru out there is trying to fit spirituality into the money god world, and just don't understand. They think they can save the Titanic by changing the captain and by patching the holes, but the money god dead mechanism.
They don't even really care about saving anything. I think they just care about their surviving, their that coming up with the next pay and being, and they don't want to throw away their whole following, because if they would take a real position and not try to kind of bang both things, they would lose 80% of their following and their income.
Yeah.
So they need to sleep with both, with both.
Yeah.
With the wife and with the whore.
Yeah. Well, and by any stretch, I'm not saying I'm any. I don't want a following. I want everyone that listens to this to understand that when you come to matriculation, aloha, I need down matriculation, you're gonna learn what I've learned, and then as you turn around and teach it, you're going to start dipping into it yourself, and you're going to bring forth your own, right? Your own individual take on it. So it's not just another Ingrid Huffman way. It is, I am truly leaning into the emerging edge every day, the emerging, what's emerging. And that's the 56th hexagram of the I Ching. It's called Sojourning at the Borders. I am truly sojourning at the borders, and I'm not declaring myself a higher level organism because I am. I'm just there because I'm sick of I'm tired. I'm done with the narrative that and that money is the money world is the only thing we know, and we've got to adapt everything to that.
Yeah, and the world is in such a desperate need of people just that can start thinking and placing themselves. And since they don't want to leave the convenience of staying where they are, they're closing the door in their own intellectual and spiritual growth. It's amazing.
Yeah, they are. Absolutely they are.
Because it won't, I mean, through that door, beyond that door, you can't sell. You have to be in the position of leaving the boat, leaving the sinking ship, to really be able to grow further into a better comprehension of how the world works and how we work and how we are.
Yeah.
So there's the invitation, folks. I need aloha. I need Tao living. Aloha, like the Hawaiian aloha. Aini with only one A, so between aloha and Aini there's one A. Then Tao, T-A-O, living.com. That's our new domain. If somebody wants to take a peek, we're renewing the website, so you're going to be seeing lots of changes, but we hope to have them soon done. And if you want to join us in coming through this door, I challenge you to find somebody else and something else that is kind of there. I can't think of anyone myself. Everybody else is still with a foot in the old boat, still kind of attached in some way to the sinking ship of the money system.
Oh, I think most everybody else is much more than just one foot in that boat. I'm not sure they even have 1 foot off of that boat.
Right. Yeah. So there it is. I mean, it's not about, we're not proud of it. I mean, I wouldn't say, well, that's pretty cool. No, I think there should be a lot more, but there isn't. Not that I can see. So there it is, folks, and join us for the continuation of this growth of the knowledge of how we are, the ontogenic basis of you. Second part next week at 6 o'clock Central Standard Time, and that's all I can say. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Ingrid, for your sharing your knowledge and everything you're building for everyone.
Yeah. You're welcome. And on that note, we're